It's 5:58 a.m. A Boeing 737 descends through the humid pre-dawn skies of southern India. Inside the cockpit, the tension is thick. Alarms chirp, terrain warnings echo, and the co-pilot leans forward, his voice trembling. "Go around, Captain, go around."
But the man at the controls doesn't move. The captain keeps the nose pointed down toward the runway, carved into a hilltop. Below them, Mangalore's infamous tabletop airport waits. 8,000 feet of asphalt ending in a deadly cliff. In the cabin, 160 passengers stir from their uneasy sleep. The engines roar louder as the descent steepens. A few passengers glance nervously at each other. Something feels very wrong. Seconds later, the ground proximity system erupts. "Sink rate! Pull up! Pull up!" The co-pilot pleads again, louder this time. "Captain, go around!" But there is no response. The jet is far too high, far too fast, and out of options. The end of the runway is rushing toward them.
Will they make it? Or is the flight already doomed before its wheels even touch the ground?
Today, I'm going to tell you the tragic and bizarre events behind the flight Air India Express 812.
I am Captain Jack Mercer. What you're going to watch now is the story from the perspective of a pilot who has lived and seen a lot in 25 years of experience. Welcome aboard.
So, it's May 22, 2010. A Boeing 737-800 lines up in the dim lights of Dubai International Airport and pushes back for a routine late-night hop to Mangalore. The plan on paper is simple. A low-cost international shuttle, 3.5 hours, drop passengers and crew on a tabletop runway carved into a hilltop on India's southwest coast. Then turn around. It looks ordinary, right? No, you are wrong, my friend. The paperwork and the clock hide crucial details that will shape the next 4 hours. On board, 160 passengers and 6 crew members. Mostly passengers were migrant workers and families returning from the Gulf. 4 cabin attendants, plus 2 cockpit crew. Exhausted bodies slump in window seats, some dozing, others awake and staring at the overhead lights. If you already have flown, you've seen this scene, right? Okay, who is in the cockpit? The captain, 55 years old, had logged more than 10,000 flight hours, including 2,440 on Boeing 737. The co-pilot, 40 years old, had logged over 3,600 flight hours. Both had previous experience at Mangalore, a fact that, paradoxically, would later appear in the report as part of the cognitive picture. Because, familiarity can breed both competence and overconfidence. You will understand soon why I'm telling this.
Now, let me tell you about Mangalore International Airport. It has a challenge because it sits on a raised plateau. My fellow pilots name it a tabletop field. The runway is finite, surrounded by steep slopes, so a visual illusion can make the landing appear deceptively level. India designates a handful of such airports as critical, imposing special operational rules and higher landing discipline. The runway length, about 8,000 feet, is adequate for a 737-800 under normal conditions, but on a late-night approach at speed, any touchdown long of the touchdown zone eats crucial stopping distance. The surrounding terrain leaves zero room for overshoot. Only a qualified captain may perform the final approach and landing at so-called critical airfields. The aircraft's short field package, intended to improve stopping and takeoff performance at short or challenging strips, but none of that will be a substitute for a precise, stabilized approach on a tabletop runway. Controllers tell the flight that Mangalore's weather is acceptable early that morning, winds calm, visibility several kilometers. But the airport's radar is out of service for 2 days. Well, normally, when we don't have a radar, we need to do the approach visually, following more basic instructions. In general, it's not a problem, but we are talking about Mangalore Airport, a critical one. That changes the rhythm of the arrival. Fewer miles to establish the approach, a later intercept of ILS, and a compressed descent profile. Those reduced track miles will force the crew to descend faster and intercept the glide slope from an unusual geometry, an operational inconvenience that increases workload and reduces margin for error, So, it's 1:06 a.m. Dubai time. The Boeing 737-800 accelerates down runway 30R at Dubai International Airport. The night air is heavy, the city's glow still visible in the distance. Inside the cockpit, the captain advances the thrust levers, N1 rising steadily as the twin CFM56 engines spool. The co-pilot calls the speeds, V1, rotate, and the nose lifts. In the cabin, the atmosphere was calm. Crew members doing their jobs, some people sleeping, some just relaxing. Pure routine. But in the cockpit, the seeds of tragedy are already planted, as you will see soon. Keep watching. So, shortly after climb-out, the workload eases and the autopilot is engaged. Now pay attention here. After the autopilot is engaged, the captain reclines, loosens his shoulders, and within minutes, his breathing grows heavy. The CVR, cockpit voice recorder, later records the unmistakable sound of snoring. It was the captain, sleeping deeply. The co-pilot is left alone with the radios, monitoring systems, and navigating across the Arabian Sea. He performs professionally, but the silence is oppressive. A lone co-pilot in the cockpit with no active conversation, no shared cross-checks, just the low hum of avionics and the occasional crackle of air traffic control. The cockpit, which I look at as my kingdom, is designed for two. You understand me, you bounce thoughts off each other, checking weather, recalculating fuel, even just confirming navigation updates. Alone, especially in the dark hours before dawn, your brain drifts. Situational awareness erodes. And yes, disaster is on the way, my friend. Keep paying attention. By the way, recently, I made this video where I tell the story of the bizarre incident with Northwest Airlines Flight 188, where the pilots missed the airport where they should have landed and kept flying high speed for over an hour. The controllers tried to call them dozens of times and not a single answer. What was happening inside the cockpit? Well, it's unbelievable. You need to watch the video. The link is in the description. Back to our story. By the time the Boeing crosses the Indian coastline, the cockpit is a study in imbalance. One man awake, quietly managing the flight, another still deep in sleep. On the horizon lies Mangalore, a tabletop runway waiting in darkness with no radar guidance available. And the flight, so far, has been quiet. Too quiet, in my opinion.
Okay, 5:30 a.m. The flight 812 is now over the Arabian Sea, approaching the lush, hilly coastline of Karnataka. The co-pilot checks in with Mangalore area control. The controller's reply is not reassuring. Radar unavailable. Expect a procedural approach. In that single sentence, the margin for error shrinks. Normally, radar would give vectors, spacing, and altitude guidance, steady hand painting the approach picture. But tonight, the radar is down. That means procedural separation only. ATC calculates aircraft positions using pilot reports of distance and time, one at a time, into the approach. No radar safety net. The CVR records the sound of movement in the cockpit. The captain stirs awake. He has been asleep for a long time. Soon, you will find out how long and why that was a big mistake. Just stay here with me. The co-pilot updates him. Weather is clear, winds light, but radar is out. The captain doesn't answer immediately. He hasn't put his headset on yet. The co-pilot repeats the message. Silence. Then a muttered response. Controllers clear them down, but because of procedural spacing, the descent starts much later than standard. Normally, Mangalore arrivals begin descent 240 kilometers out, giving time to stabilize on the ILS. Today, they're held until 148 kilometers from the runway.
That leaves them too high, too close, too late. Can you see problems here?
So the co-pilot notices, he voices his uncertainty, radar not available, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. But the captain takes control. Instead of recalculating, rebriefing, or requesting a holding pattern, he presses forward. He extends speed brakes, lowers the gear early, and pitches down to catch the glide slope from above. Let me tell you that this is a dangerous maneuver. Inside the cockpit, subtle tensions surface. The co-pilot feels uneasy, but the steep power gradient silences him. Regulations forbid him from landing at Mangalore. Only the captain is authorized for that critical airport. The cultural gap widens the silence. An expatriate senior captain versus a local junior officer. Every instinct tells the co-pilot to insist on a go-around or to demand more track miles. But hierarchy, duty, and fear of overstepping keep him cautious. The captain, meanwhile, shows signs of overconfidence. He has landed at Mangalore before, he knows the runway, and he trusts his hands-on flying skills. I think that the confidence blinds him to the instability of the approach profile. I mean, this is where every alarm bell in my head starts ringing. You're approaching a critical airfield, short runway, tabletop, no margin for error. Radar's out, which means you should plan extra carefully. If you're high and close, well, the textbook response is simple. Go around, enter a hold, set up properly. There's no shame in that. In fact, it's good airmanship.
But what I see here is a captain facing a compressed descent and trying to make it work. That's dangerous, you know? And for the first officer, this is a nightmare scenario. That's a trap. I can tell you because I flew as co-pilot lots of times. It's a terrible feeling being strapped in and seeing danger build, but not sure if you're allowed to stop it. By now, Flight 812 is tearing down toward Mangalore at a dangerously steep descent rate, more than 3,000 feet per minute at times, twice what's considered safe. The ground proximity alarms are about to start. The first officer is already uneasy. The passengers are still asleep, completely unaware. But the airport is rushing toward them, and the captain has decided he will land this airplane. The first warnings are here, but the real, very real trouble is about to begin, my friend. It's 0550 a.m. The Boeing 737 is now on final approach into Mangalore's runway 24. The DME arc is behind them, the aircraft is turning inbound. But the numbers don't add up. At just 4 nautical miles from touchdown, the jet is still at 2,500 feet, nearly twice the altitude it should be. The descent rate spikes, 3,000 to 4,000 feet per minute. The GPWS, Ground Proximity Warning System, erupts. Sink rate, pull up, pull up. Inside the cockpit, the warnings overlap with the strained voice of the co-pilot. Captain, go around, unstabilized. The captain, hands firm on the controls, presses forward. To correct the profile, he pitches down aggressively, deploys flaps 40, and leaves the gear extended. The descent is no longer a smooth glide. It's literally a dive, a desperate attempt to catch the slope from above. Investigators will later say that the aircraft likely locked onto a false glide slope, which means that it's an erroneous ILS signal lobe that can trick us pilots into thinking that we are aligned when in fact the descent path is too steep. The rate of descent, the altitude, the GPWS warnings all confirm this is not a stable approach. Yet the captain mutters, "Wrong localizer, glide path," and continues. The co-pilot has now called for a go-around, not only once, not only twice, but 3 times, my friend, once even accidentally broadcasting his plea on the open frequency. Controllers hear the desperation. Go around, Captain, but nothing changes. To make it worse, regulations forbid him from taking control, and culture discourages him from challenging the authority of a senior expatriate captain, as I said before. The cockpit has fallen into what safety analysts call authority gradient paralysis. The silence grows heavier. Every second the runway is closer, every second options disappear. Meanwhile, passengers feel the sudden dive press them against the seatbelt. They started to notice that something was not normal. Outside, the city lights of Mangalore are suddenly much closer, too close. They don't know it, but the aircraft is now well above threshold speed, 160 knots, 20 knots too fast. And because of the late descent, they will cross the runway threshold not at 50 feet, but nearly 200 feet above ground level. I mean, this is so crazy, right?
In the tower, an air traffic controller keys his microphone. Express India 812, confirm all is okay. The captain replies, flatly, affirmative, affirmative. Come on, how could he say that? How could he really believe that everything was okay? Well, the situation is now classic cognitive tunneling. The captain is locked on to one goal: land the plane. He blocks out contradictory inputs, the GPWS alarms, the first officer's repeated calls, the abnormal descent profile. His narrowed focus eliminates alternatives. For the co-pilot, the psychology is equally corrosive. Repeated warnings ignored, authority imbalance reinforced by regulations, and fear of career repercussions if he seizes control. Each second erodes his willingness to act. Together, they are trapped in a loop of hesitation and overconfidence. Exactly the kind of human factors that aviation safety training warns us against, you know? Now, it's 06:03 a.m., and the Boeing 737 roars across the threshold of runway 24 at 160 knots, 200 feet too high, 20 knots too fast, and still not stabilized. So, at 06:04 a.m., the aircraft hurtles over the threshold of runway 24. Far too fast, far too high. The standard threshold crossing height should have been 50 feet. The touchdown zone, the first 3,000 feet of runway, disappears beneath them unused. In the cockpit, tension. The co-pilot says in a low voice, "Go around, Captain." The GPWS sounds, "Sink rate, pull up, pull up!" Then the co-pilot says louder, "Unstabilized, go around!" But the captain totally ignores him. At 5,200 feet down the runway, one of the main wheels slams onto the asphalt. The jet bounces, skips, and settles heavily. By now, only 2,800 feet remain to stop a 67-ton airplane traveling at highway speeds. The auto brakes, set only to medium, activate, but the deceleration is nowhere near enough. The captain deploys reverse thrust, but then, inexplicably, he cancels it and brings the throttles forward. Yes, he attempted a late go-around. By the way, a maneuver strictly prohibited once thrust reverses are engaged. The CVR captures the confusion, the co-pilot saying, "We don't have runway left." The GPWS sounds, pull up," and the engines roar as throttles pushed forward. For a few seconds, the airplane accelerates again, but the physics are impossible. With only a few hundred meters of asphalt left, there is no chance of climbing out. The reversers had already been deployed. The aerodynamics are destabilized. The decision seals their fate. From the control tower, Mangalore ATC can see the landing lights barreling down the runway, far too deep, far too fast. An uneasy silence fills the frequency. They know the arrestor bed at the end of runway 24 is minimal. They know there is a cliff. So seconds later, the inevitable unfolds.
At 06:05 a.m., the Boeing 737 explodes past the end of runway 24 and plunges into the void. For 5 sickening seconds, the jet drops nearly 180 feet down the hillside. The sound inside the cabin is chaos. Engines roaring, metal screeching, passengers screaming, overhead bins bursting open. When the fuselage slams into the slope, the impact is catastrophic. The aircraft breaks apart into 3 main sections. The cockpit is crushed against the hillside. The midsection is torn wide open, its jagged ribs of aluminum glowing red from fire. The tail, partially intact, juts upward like a gravestone against the dawn sky.
Fuel ignites instantly. Black smoke churns upward, visible for miles. The crash forces are brutal. The math? Of the 166 souls on board, only 8 survive. The rest, 158 lives, are lost in India's worst aviation disaster in a decade. The question? Why did this happen? Why did a routine flight on a clear night end in a fireball at the bottom of a ravine? The landing is over. The catastrophe is total. But the real story is just beginning, my friend. The black boxes will reveal the truth. Keep watching.
So when the black boxes of Air India Express Flight 812 were recovered from the smoking ravine in Mangalore, investigators finally pieced together what had gone so terribly wrong. At first glance, the disaster seemed almost inexplicable. A relatively young Boeing 737, clear weather, a qualified crew, and a straightforward arrival into an airport they both knew. Yet behind the burned wreckage lay a chain of human errors, fatigue, and systemic flaws that lined up with deadly precision. The CVR revealed a chilling truth. From shortly after takeoff until just 25 minutes before landing, the captain had been asleep. The audio captured continuous snoring for more than, guess what, 1.5 hours. While controlled rest is allowed in some airlines, it must be managed carefully and never for such long, unmonitored periods. The result was that the captain woke up just before descent, in the middle of what sleep specialists call sleep inertia, the groggy, cognitively impaired state that can last 20 to 30 minutes after waking from deep sleep. This single factor colored everything that followed. When air traffic control cleared the descent later than usual, 148 kilometers from the airport instead of the standard 240, due to radar being out of service, the approach was already compressed. From a pilot perspective, the correct response would have been to request holding, plan the descent properly, or even divert to a nearby alternate. Instead, still groggy, the captain pressed on, descending far too steeply, attempting to catch the glide slope from above. The flight data recorder, FDR, confirmed that the descent rate at times exceeded 3,000 to 4,000 feet per minute. This is the double of what is safe. The 737 even likely intercepted a false glide slope, an erroneous signal lobe above the true path, which made the approach even steeper. By the time they crossed the runway threshold, the jet was at 200 feet AGL and 160 knots, about 4 times too high and 20 knots too fast.
Let me tell you, every stage of this approach violated standard operating procedures. First, descent planning. The crew should have conducted a proper approach briefing, calculating fuel, descent profile, and landing distance. Instead, no briefing was held. Second, stabilized approach criteria. Airlines worldwide follow a strict rule. If the aircraft is not on speed, on slope, and fully configured by 1,000 feet AGL in IMC or 500 feet in VMC, a go-around is mandatory. Flight 812 was far outside those limits, yet the approach continued. Third, CRM and authority gradient. The co-pilot should have had both the authority and the confidence to take over. But cultural deference, company rules at critical airports, and the steep captain FO hierarchy stopped him. He remained a passive voice instead of the final barrier. Fourth, emergency decision-making. A diversion to Bangalore, Kochi, or Goa was possible with the fuel on board, but diversion was never discussed because the captain was under psychological pressure to land, possibly influenced by fatigue and company culture. My 25 years of experience allows me to be sure that had the crew simply executed a go-around when the co-pilot called for it, the crash would have been avoided. Period. I've flown hundreds of approaches into challenging airports, and the golden rule has never changed. Stabilize by 1,000 feet
or you go around. There are no exceptions. A long night, a radar outage, a steep descent, none of that excuses ignoring the basics. And here's the part that hits me hardest. The first officer saw it coming. Fatigue, authority gradient, poor CRM, those aren't just buzzwords in training manuals. They kill airplanes when ignored. Flight 812 is proof. So, the final investigation by India's Directorate General of Civil Aviation, DGCA, did not stop with the pilots. It highlighted wider failures like fatigue management. Air India Express lacked robust fatigue risk management. Long duty hours and night schedules were routine. Training and simulators. The airline often relied on Air India simulators, which investigators found were poorly maintained and offered negative training. Organizational culture. A punitive atmosphere discouraged pilots from admitting fatigue or executing diversions. First officers, especially local ones, often felt unable to challenge expatriate captains. Airport infrastructure. Mangalore's tabletop runway had only minimal runway end safety area, RISA. Once the aircraft ran off, the cliff left no margin for survival. Well, Flight 812 should have been a routine arrival on a clear May morning. Do you agree? Instead, it became India's worst air disaster in a decade. The wreckage was cleared, the dead were mourned, but the questions remained. Would India's aviation system change, or would these lessons fade? That's the story of the aftermath. Keep watching.
Fortunately, the crash of Air India Express Flight 812 sent shockwaves through India and the global aviation community. It wasn't just the scale of the tragedy: 158 lives lost, families shattered, entire communities grieving. But the uncomfortable truth is revealed. Even in modern aviation, human factors can override every layer of technology. So, the official investigation made clear recommendations. Let me tell you some that I think are the most important. Fatigue management. Airlines were urged to adopt formal fatigue risk management systems, or FRMS. Flight 812 had highlighted how circadian lows, long duty cycles, and unmanaged cockpit rest could fatally impair performance. Crew Resource Management, or CRM, regulators emphasized stronger CRM training. First officers needed the authority and confidence to challenge captains, even at critical airports. The captain-only landing rule at tabletop runways came under scrutiny for fostering unhealthy power gradients. Training standards. Air India Express was told to improve simulator availability and quality. Negative training from outdated simulators was no longer acceptable. Airport infrastructure. Recommendations were issued to expand runway and safety areas, or RESA, improve lighting systems, and strengthen emergency response capacity at tabletop airports like Mangalore. For pilots worldwide, Flight 812 became a stark reminder of the stabilized approach rule. If the aircraft is not configured and within parameters by 1,000 feet, the only safe choice is to go around. No prestige, no company schedule, no personal pride is worth overriding that fundamental. Equally critical was the lesson in CRM. The cockpit is not a dictatorship. Every crew member must feel empowered to act when safety is at stake. Flight 812 wasn't just an Indian tragedy. It was a global wake-up call. I've seen the same dynamics in cockpits everywhere. Tired crews pushing through, junior pilots too scared to speak up, captains convinced they can salvage a bad approach. What I've learned here is simple. Safety isn't about heroics, it's about discipline. So, for every future pilot listening, if you're too high, too fast, too unstable, go around, always. You'll never regret the go-around you did, but you'll regret the one you didn't. Understand? In the years following, India established an independent accident investigation board, upgraded airport safety zones, and mandated CRM reinforcement in recurrent training. But for many families, these reforms felt too late. Compensation payments were slow, sometimes unequal. At the crash site, a memorial park now stands, honoring the victims.
Each May 22nd, relatives gathered to lay flowers and remembered the morning their loved ones never came home. All right, if this story moved you, please like the video, share it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. You don't want to lose my next episode, right? I'll bring more stories, and as ever, I'm going to tell them from a pilot's perspective, something you will not find in the news, guaranteed. I'm Captain Jack Mercer. Fly safe, and I'll see you in the next one.